Seeing through the lens. There are moments in life when people say they feel numb. They describe a sense of distance, a flatness, a quiet seal between themselves and what is happening. They worry that something is wrong with them, that they should be feeling more, that presence has slipped away. Often this is spoken about as a problem to solve, a blockage to clear, or a failure of attention. But there is another way to understand what is happening, one that does not rush to correct it or explain it away. Sometimes what is being experienced is not numbness at all, but a particular way of noticing, a way of seeing moments that is clear, careful and exact, yet mediated, like looking through a lens. Most people already know what this feels like. It happens whenever a camera is raised. At a concert, a birthday, a school play, a quiet domestic scene. The moment does not disappear when the lens comes up. The sound is still there. The image is still there. The people are still there. And yet the relationship to the moment changes. The moment becomes framed. Through a lens, experience is not lost, but it is translated. It becomes something to be held, captured, preserved. The instinct behind this is not avoidance, it is care. The moment matters enough to want to keep it, and because it cannot be kept, it is sealed instead. This same movement can happen internally, without a camera, without conscious choice, without thought. The body learns how to look at moments in a way that preserves them rather than enters them fully. The moment is allowed to exist exactly as it is, but it is not stepped into. It is observed with restraint. When this happens, people often say they feel numb, but numbness is not the right word. Numbness suggests a lack of sensation, a shutting down, an absence of feeling. What is happening here is different. Sensation remains, attention remains, care remains. What changes is the depth of immersion. The moment does not flood the system. It does not overwhelm. It does not alter the inner state dramatically. It passes through a frame. This can feel wrong in a culture that equates depth with intensity and care with emotional impact. If something matters, we expect it to move us. If it does not, we assume we are disconnected. But this assumption overlooks how often framing is a natural response to what is precious and fleeting. The lens appears most readily when time becomes perceptible, when even faintly the body registers that this configuration will not last, that the child will not always be this age, that this quiet moment will not repeat, that the person being looked at will change, move on, or one day be gone. This does not need to be thought. It is felt as a background condition of living. In response, the system does not necessarily open more. It often does the opposite. It steadies, it stills, it frames. The moment is held carefully, like an image that must not be smudged by intervention. Seen this way, the lens is not distance. It is restraint, a refusal to interfere, a decision made below thought to let what is happening be exactly what it is. This is why the lens is often mistaken for apathy. From the outside, stillness can look like lack of engagement. Reduced impulse to act can look like indifference. But internally, the posture is different. The stillness is intentional, even if unchosen. The lack of action is not because nothing matters, but because acting would alter something that feels right as it is. Apathy in its ordinary sense is absence of interest. The lens carries interest, but suspends intervention. It is caring without intrusion. This matters because many people feel ashamed of this state. They think they should be more present, more emotionally available, more expressive. They try to push themselves into the moment, to feel harder, to break the seal. Often this effort creates more distance than the lens itself. The lens does not need to be fought. It does not need to be fixed. It is one of several ways humans relate to experience. Sometimes it loosens on its own. Sometimes it stays. Neither is a failure. There are moments where putting the camera down is right, where stepping fully into experience brings something alive, and there are moments where holding the frame is appropriate, where the quiet discipline of not entering preserves what would otherwise be disturbed. The problem arises when people believe there is only one correct way to be with life. The language of presence often carries an unspoken demand. Be fully here, be immersed, be open, be permeable. While this can be beautiful, it is not always humane. Not all moments can be lived from the inside without cost. Not all relationships can sustain constant immersion. Not all care expresses itself through emotional intensity. Long love, especially, teaches this. Love that lasts is rarely a continuous state of emotional flooding. It is steadier than that. It learns when to step forward and when to step back, when to act and when to witness. The lens is one of the ways love avoids becoming invasive or consuming. Looking through a lens does not mean love is absent. It often means love is being careful. This is particularly true in moments involving children, aging, illness or change. Places where intervention would not help, where control would damage, where the most loving act is to let the moment unfold without interference. The lens allows this. It allows clarity without possession, attention without capture, seeing without taking. When people misinterpret this as numbness, they often turn against themselves. They tell themselves they are broken, detached, emotionally unavailable. They try to force openness where openness would not be kind. Naming the lens changes this. It removes the moral pressure. It allows people to see that what they are experiencing is not a deficit, but a mode. This does not mean the lens is always desirable. There are times when it can become habitual, when framing replaces living, when preservation becomes avoidance. But that cannot be diagnosed from the presence of the lens alone. It depends on context, on rhythm, on whether the lens ever comes down. The point is not to judge the mode, but to recognize it. Once recognized, people often relax. They stop asking what is wrong with them. They stop trying to fix a state that is not broken. They can let the lens be there without adding a second layer of struggle. This is the core ethic here, not improvement, recognition. There is also relief in realizing that many moments are lived this way without being named. Most of life passes through some kind of frame. Not every moment imprints. Not every experience becomes a turning point. And that is not a failure of living. It is how continuity is maintained. Moments that fully absorb us are rare. They stand out precisely because they break through framing. But they are not the only valid moments. A life made only of immersion would be unsustainable. The lens gives life a way to keep going. It is also worth noting that when the lens lifts, it usually does so without effort. Shock, laughter, grief, sudden intimacy, absorption in work or play. The frame drops and experience rushes in. These moments cannot be manufactured. They happen when they happen. Trying to force them often backfires. Which brings us back to the beginning. When people say they feel numb, it is worth asking whether what they are experiencing is actually absence, or whether it is framing. Whether they are disconnected, or whether they are holding something carefully, the difference matters, because absence calls for care. Framing calls for understanding. This reflection does not ask people to put the camera down or to keep it raised. It does not argue for more presence or less. It simply names a human habit that is widespread and rarely spoken about. Sometimes we live inside moments. Sometimes we walk beside them. And sometimes we frame them, not because we are afraid to feel, but because we know without thinking that what we are seeing cannot be held any other way. And that too is part of being alive.